I'd like to welcome everybody back to class. If you came in the last couple of seconds and I did not get your name, please make sure to stay after class to make sure you get credit for coming here today. I see at least 3 or 4 of you that have come in, so if you wouldn't mind, I sure would appreciate that, okay? Now, I noticed that we've got 8 people online joining us today. I promise you, in another couple of weeks, I'm going to give you the ability to watch 1 or 2 classes from your home if you'd prefer to stay there. Since you are a seated class and this is listed as a hybrid class, I have to actually take attendance of you on this campus. Otherwise, I'd let you all go home and watch me from online, but we have to be here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I just sent around, actually it should be coming around in 1 minute. I've got 8 people, 9 people online, and I encourage all of you people online to gossip, chat, talk to each other as much as you want. Talking behind the teacher's back is definitely allowed in this class. And I'm also sending the link to each and every one of you. I encourage you to talk in class too. So if you want to chat online and talk to people online about what you're seeing, or hey, I don't understand what the hell this guy's saying today, feel free to do that. The link should be coming around. Actually, it should be on your phones right now if you're interested. So I invite all of you to interact together. Now, we're going to start off by talking about that email I sent around earlier today. Online, you folks should have gotten it, and you folks should have gotten it as well. Did anybody read the article that I sent around? Okay, that is a classic psychological finding that I teach every semester in developmental psych class. When we come to babies and nutrition, every semester we tell them moms who breastfeed will have babies who have all of these wonderful benefits. So, having read that article, can anybody tell me what kind of research that article was? What type of research? Was it descriptive research? Was it correlational research? Or was it experimental research? Okay, so we have somebody out here. Hello, how are you doing? Thanks for coming. Sorry, it's a live broadcast, so we got to start right on time today. If you would, be sure to stay after class and make sure I get your name on the attendance. Okay? So, I'm asking somebody, why would you say it was an experimental finding? What leads you to that conclusion?
From what I was reading, didn't it say that they tested the ones who weren't breastfed at all, and then ones that were breastfed for a year, and then ones that were breastfed?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Now, I would ask you the question, did they use this thing called, what is random assignment? Can anybody tell me what random assignment is? Yes, ma'am?
Every person has the same chance getting into the, I cannot formulate thoughts.
Into each condition. Right. So what I might do is I might say, hey, I think breastfeeding or drinking breast milk, let's keep it only semi-weird here, drinking breast milk will help students' test scores in psychology class. So what I could then do is go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and randomly pick you into 2 groups, right? One group is the ones, and one group is the twos. Now, because I close my eyes when I put you into groups, chances are both groups are going to have about the same amount of intelligence or ability. And then one group drinks the breast milk before class every day, and one group gets good old vitamin D cow's milk. And then at the end, we look at your final exam scores. Now, in this, what did they say about the mothers who chose to use breastfeeding? Did it suggest that they randomly assigned them or that they were already existing?
They assumed, I think it said that they assumed because they had more time to themselves that they were able to breastfeed, and the moms who had things to do, they weren't able to like devote the time to breastfeeding. So anybody who was breastfeeding, the mom was already well off, like they were already well off and they had the means.
Right, absolutely. I see a bunch of people online saying hello. It's good to see you too, Michael. We've got a full class here. Feel free to chat amongst yourself. I like what you're saying, but what you're saying is that this might have been a correlational finding, okay, because we didn't tell the moms what to do. They kind of chose what to do. And the problem is, you're mentioning the problem with correlation is that there may be something else that goes along with breastfeeding. So the moms had more time, which meant they had more money, right? And a lot of times, maybe they went to school and took a developmental psych class where somebody told them you have to use breast milk. So there might be an educational difference as well, right? And so if you look at the bottom of this thing, what it's going to tell you is that this was a correlational study. And anytime we see a correlational study, we need to stop and say, what were the pre-existing differences that could have affected the way these results turned out? Now, what do you folks think breastfeeding is still, in spite of that, do you think there's some value in it? Yeah. You breastfed your daughter? Okay. Fantastic. What do you think might be a value of it? And I'm not trying to trip you up here and cause you to say something silly. I believe in the value of it too.
I mean, if the nature coded there for viewers for any animals feeding their children, whether there has to be value in it.
Right.
Otherwise, it would have been extinct.
Okay, right.
Value in it.
Right, okay. Good. I like that. Yes, ma'am?
I have more of a scientific reason. I mean, it's proven that breast milk has the vitamins, minerals, and all that. Brain development.
Absolutely right. And also maybe immunity, right? Immune resources, absolutely. So what we want to do is understand sort of the strength of these findings. There are values in it, but we have to be careful. Definitely don't go out saying drinking breast milk causes X, causes Y, or causes Z. Now, the reason I'm telling you, this was like a starter article. They gave you the research finding, and you might have thought it was an experimental finding, but at the very end, they said, hey, this was a correlational study, and there could have been other factors. What I want you to understand is that when you look in the news every day, and this is one of the problems, I know what you said about TikTok the other day, Olivia, and TikTok is legitimate, but sometimes they stop at the headline. And if you stop at the headline, you don't look deeply through the article, and you may miss the subtleties of what the given article is trying to say to you. Does that make sense? No? Yes or no? Oh, okay. I don't have my glasses on, so all I see is I've got bad vision, so I see a blob over there, really. Okay, cool. And I hope everybody online understands that. Hopefully my sound is coming through well to those of you online. I don't know if any of you listened to the recording of this lecture. God, I hope you didn't, from Monday. But the sound may have been a little bit shady. Hopefully the sound is a little bit better for those of you online. All right. With that being said, let's go ahead. Audio quality is great today. You can hear me perfectly. Your sound is good. That's what I'm looking for, a little bit of validation to start the day. Always makes me feel good. All right, so we talked about Chapter 2, which was research methodologies on Monday. Today, we're talking about Chapter 7, which is IQ testing. IQ testing represents a measurement, an observation that we make about human beings. Remember, I told you that one of the ways we gather science is by making observations. IQ testing is one of the most famous and important measures of human qualities there are. You think that personality is important? Not nearly as important as IQ to the modern world. I'm not saying right or wrong, but in terms of the importance that is placed on it. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about IQ testing, and then at some point I'm going to try to talk to you about the social context in which IQ testing was born, which caused it to be sometimes problematic. I'm going to argue to you that IQ testing is very useful in a lot of situations. However, it can be a tool that maybe is used to continue bias, to push bias on people, and to make judgments about people that maybe aren't necessarily true and or accurate. Okay, so let's talk about IQ tests. You probably didn't realize this, but IQ tests, before there were IQ tests, there were no human measurements that were done, okay? Personality tests hadn't been invented yet, all right? No real human measurement existed. IQ tests. In fact, before IQ tests were invented, most psychologists secretly went around and talked about how useless their field was. Yeah, we've got these PhDs, we've got labs, but we're not solving any problem. We haven't done anything useful. IQ tests represent sort of the first really important human measurement and important quality ever identified. Now, it was created by a Frenchman. Actually, I believe this guy was I think he was trained classically as a lawyer. His name was Alfred Binet. Now, the French government came to this fellow and asked him to develop a test to help them identify students who might need extra help in class. All right, so here's the deal. When I walk into a classroom full of students, you folks have got all kinds of abilities. This guy right here may be a certified genius. You may be above average. You may be average. And this person right here, I'm not going to point anybody, that may be the below average kind of person. I've got to try and talk to you students and bring you all along at the same time. Have you ever been in a class with one of those kids that just doesn't get it? You know what I mean? You're trying to learn your multiplication tables and Billy just can't figure it out, right? Right, okay. Now there are those people. We have all kinds of resources to identify those people today, but back in 1906, that wasn't a thing. And so the French government asked this guy, Alfred Binet, to invent this thing to help identify that. They didn't ask him to create an IQ test. They did not ask him that. They asked him simply to create they didn't ask him to create a test of intelligence. They never used that word. Instead, they said, help us develop a test that will identify who's going to have trouble keeping up with the other students. And he created the first IQ test in France. Now, it was really simple, not anything like the test you might think. Instead of being a paper and pencil test, it was like 30 tasks that he thought children of different ages should know. So when you came in the office, the first test would be this. And even a 3-year-old knows that that's what you're supposed to do, right? And then he would light a match and he would move it back and forth. And a normal 2-year-old knows to follow it back and forth. And he would go all the way up to the most complicated question. He would ask them this question. My neighbor has had the hospital come over, had a priest come over, and had a lawyer come over. What's happening at my friend's house? What's happening to my friend? They're dying, absolutely. And he had sort of these 30 tasks, and he could gauge how old your mind was, so he thought. Y'all ever heard of like being on grade level, reading on grade level, right? Same kind of thing. He could figure out what grade level your brain was and compare it to how old you really were. So she thinks like an 8-year-old, but she's only 6 years old. So she's 1.3 times better off than she should be. She's a clever person, right? On the other hand, this guy right here is 10 years old, and he can only do the tasks of a 5-year-old. So he's 5 over 10, 0.5. I know, bummer for you, right? And so what we can do is, somebody said, you know, that's a cool idea, but the decimal points are problematic. So let's just multiply it times 100. And that's how the IQ number of 100 was born. 100 is an average IQ score on a modern test. It was born because 1 over 1 equals 1. And let's make it so that we don't have any fractions. If you have an IQ of 50, which is what I just gave you, that would mean you're below average in intelligence, right? Now, the cool thing was everybody saw the value of this test. First, it came over to the United States, and somebody at Stanford University invented a version of that for American students. It became known as the Stanford-Binet IQ test. Then the military got a hold of it in 1917, and they made a version of this test called the Army Alpha test, right? IQ, Army still uses IQ tests. What are they called now? The ASVAB test, created in the late 60s, absolutely. But the military uses IQ tests. Are you going to fly the plane, or do you need to be washing the plane? Which one are you going to do, right? And then a fellow named E.F. Wunderlich created a test in the 30s, and he said IQ tests are great, but who has 3 hours for an IQ test? So he created a 12-minute test that has 20 questions, and businesses love to use the Wunderlich IQ test because you can give it really, really quickly. The most famous business that uses the Wunderlich IQ test is the NFL, and you all always hear them joking about some quarterback that scores low on the Wunderlich, or making jokes about how this lineman scores super duper high on the Wunderlich test. So you're going to see those. Now, do any of you, bunch of kids, none of y'all have children in school? Oh, everybody looks young to me. Okay, are your kids in 3rd grade yet? No. Oh, okay. See, never mind. I'm not that. Okay. Well, when your kids get into 3rd grade, everybody in America is going to take the COGAT test. This is the most popular paper and pencil test that you can hand out to 300 students at a time. And if you were ever put into, what are those AG classes? Are they called AG? Academically gifted? AIG. In order to get into AIG, you have to score in the 95th percentile on the COGAT test, right? And then the Wechsler scales. The Wechsler scales are actually the IQ test that you take when you go to a clinical psychologist, or when you're indicted for murder and we want to find out what your intelligence level is, or if you are having trouble in school and you go to the school psychologist, and that's the Wechsler scales. Now, a real IQ test that's used for clinical purposes, like if I thought you had a psychological problem and part of the diagnosis process was an IQ test, I would give you a one-on-one IQ test, all right? I would still be asking you to do tests, but I would be watching you, because there are things that affect your IQ score that maybe you don't see on a paper and pencil test. Maybe English isn't your first language, so when I give you the test, you don't understand what I'm saying. If I handed you a paper and pencil test and you didn't speak the language, you'd come up as intellectually deficient. Are you intellectually deficient, or do we have a language problem? I can give you the test and see if maybe you have an attention problem or auditory problems, other things that aren't related to intelligence, right? And the Wechsler test, there are actually 3 of them. Did you know that IQ can be reliably measured starting at the age of 4? Starting at 4 years of age, I can tell you who's going to be the cleverest person in class. IQ can be reliably measured starting at age 4. What does that mean? That means if you're in the 85th percentile at age 4, chances are you're going to be close to the 85th percentile at age 14, close to the 84th percentile at age 24, 34, and 44. It's a very, very reliable measure. We have 3 different ones. One for preschool children, okay? Then there's one for K through 12 children. And then if any of you went as an adult and needed to have some sort of IQ battery done, it would be the WACE, the Wechsler Adult Scale for Intelligence. Now, here's the deal. IQ tests, as conceived by this guy named Alfred Binet, and as created, are designed to measure this thing we call aptitude. Aptitude is kind of not what you know, but how good you are at learning and knowing things. Part of it's how clever you are, but you know what? Some of you couldn't answer a chemistry question because you haven't had chemistry. Does that mean you couldn't learn chemistry? Absolutely not. So IQ tests are designed in a perfect world to measure your ability to learn, not the facts you know. Anytime you take a test that asks you about facts, that is what we would call an achievement test. The test that you are going to take in here for the final exam is an achievement test. Am I going to figure out who's the most clever person in here? No, I'm just going to find out who knows the most psychology facts. Okay? In terms of achievement and aptitude, one of the things that I had to figure out when I became a teacher, one of the things I had to realize was I know the most about psychology in this classroom. But if my IQ is in the top 10%, that means at least 2 people, 3 people in every class are sitting back there thinking, this guy's not very smart at all, right? So just because your teacher is in front of you, that does not mean they are the most clever person in the room. Lose that notion. Disabuse yourself of that notion. They just know more sociology than you. They know more history than you. They know more psychology than you. Whether or not they happen to be clever or have more aptitude is something you will have to figure out on a case-by-case basis, all right? So I remember as a student, I always used to sit out there thinking that these people in the front were fountains of wisdom. No, they're not. No, they're not, okay? So here's the deal. This is a measurement. This is an observational measurement that we can make. And when it was created, what this tool was used to do was to figure out how people compared to one another. How could you distribute people on this instrument? Now, what you're looking at right here is a normal distribution, otherwise known as a bell curve. You know, let me check, see. Okay. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Sarah Gabriel mentioned that she had a 2nd grader a long time ago. If anybody's watching the chat, help me out. Sometimes I don't pay attention to my online students, though I do love you, I promise. I do. I really do. Okay, so here's the deal. What they found with IQ testing, instead of now trying to figure out how old your mind is, are you a 23-year-old mind or a 32-year-old mind? That doesn't make sense for adults. I can't say that how old is your mind, and I could say, well, my mind is 45. What the heck does that mean for an adult? So instead of using this deviation method, trying to figure out if you're ahead or behind grade level, now what they use, now they use the deviation method, where they say, hey, compare, how old are you?
28.
How smart are you compared to all 28-year-olds? How do you score compared to all 28-year-olds? How old are you, sir?
24.
How do you score compared to all 24-year-olds? I'll ask myself, how do I score compared to all 53-year-olds in the world? And what you will find is that these scores on an IQ test are distributed normally like a lot of other human qualities. Did you know this? Height is normally distributed with this bell curve. Most of us are in the middle with a few NBA players at one end and a few really short people like Prince at the other end. Probably an old social reference. I can't use that cultural reference anymore, right? Same thing with weight. All of us fall in the middle. There's some really, really heavy people and some really, really light people. Did you know that shoe size is also normally distributed? There are just a few of us out there with the big clown feet. And there are just a few of us with the teeny, teeny, tiny little feet. Instead, the rest of us are in the middle somewhere from like size 5 to size 11 or 12 or whatnot. There's only a few, LeBron James or whoever those guys are, with the size 22E whatever feet, right? So, IQ scores are normally distributed. Now, here, let me tell you something about IQ scores. There are two things you need to understand. What's called a raw score and what's called a standardized score. All right? So, this number 100 is an arbitrary number. It's an arbitrary number. 100 is a standardized score. We say that 100 is going to represent average. Before we even start, if you're the average person, I'm going to give you the score of 100. So then let's say my IQ test is 250 questions long. What I'm going to do for all 53-year-olds like myself is I'm going to give a representative sample of 53-year-olds this test. Some of those 53-year-olds are going to score really high and get a lot of questions right. Some of them are going to score just a few questions right? So out of 250 questions, let's say the best score is 243 out of 250, and the worst score is 60 out of 250. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rank order those people from the worst score all the way up to the best score. Does that make sense so far? And I'm going to take the person who's right in the middle, and I'm going to assign them an arbitrary value called 100, okay? And so what you're going to see are raw scores, and especially with personality tests, you're going to see what we call standardized scores, all right? And so the person who scores in the 50th percentile is going to get the IQ of 100. Why is this important? Crazy thing down here that you should know about. Every generation, the IQ scores get better. You know, your parents probably give you crap for not being as good as back in their generation. It's a lie. Turns out IQ scores get higher every generation. So, in order to be ranked 100 now, average, you have to score way more questions right than you did back in 1930. In fact, if you scored average in 1930, the number of questions that it took to get average in 1930 would almost rate you as intellectually deficient now. You'd almost have a disability, okay? And what's rated as average now would almost make you gifted in 1930. So the reason we use standardized scores and raw scores is so that we can continually change what average means. And this thing called the Flynn effect shows that this distribution is creeping this way every time, so you have to score higher. Now, if you look at the numbers, statistical principle that is not important here, but one standard deviation from the average is what we would call the average group right here. So if you score from 85 to 115, this is going to be in what we would call the average range, all right? If you score from 115 to 130, you'll get that diagnosis of above average. You might say you call yourself above average. From 84 to 70, you'd be below average. And then if you score up here in this little yellow part, you're going to be called gifted. You might even go to AIG classes and do that kind of stuff. If your score is up here, 2.5%, Not very many. Now, what do I need to be successful? Is this person necessarily better? Nope, absolutely not. In fact, they say really all you need to be a super trillionaire, however successful you want, above average is good enough. There is no need to think about genius level. We talk about geniuses as if they're something special. No. And in fact, if you look at this link right here, you're going to find out that IQ has absolutely no correlation with your happiness. So being smarter does not make you any happier. Now, let's go down here to this problematic part right here. This is a part we would call, we would give the diagnosis of, we could potentially give the diagnosis of intellectual disability. All right. Now, intellectual disability is a diagnosis that you can get. It's a clinical diagnosis. They used to maybe use the word mental retardation. It's intellectual disability. Now, when do you get a diagnosis of intellectual disability? Not only do you have to score poorly on an IQ test, not only because some people are so dyslexic, okay, that there's no way they're going to pass an IQ test. I have a friend right now, the guy didn't make it through 6th grade because he is so stinking dyslexic. However, he is rich as an auto mechanic because he can do things with vehicles. But you know what I mean, in terms of reading and writing and stuff that might work for you and me, just doesn't, his brain doesn't work that way. So if he took an IQ test, he might score really low, but he's still super effective as a human being. With IDD, what they're going to do is it's also going to include a low IQ score and also functional disabilities. The inability to organize yourself, to get up and get dressed in the morning, to problem solve, that kind of stuff. And the IDD disability disorder that is listed in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Psychological Disorders, is a disorder that begins in childhood, difficulty in reasoning, which means a low IQ test, and inability to meet normal social and practical areas of living. So a low IQ score itself does not lead to this diagnosis. And I think that point is important enough that I put it on your homework. Okay, I think there's a true-false question. If you score below 70, you automatically get the ID diagnosis. No, you don't. No, you don't. All right? Now, and I do want you to know, I've got a nephew with Down syndrome, and it's typically going to be the most common cause of moderate to severe IDD. Does anybody know anyone with Down syndrome or have a friend or a family member? Yeah. My cousin, he has an apartment that he lives in the garage of his parents' house, and he's pretty independent. He has a job that he goes to, and somebody comes and picks him up and takes him to the job. He gets fed, but he's kind of semi-independent. But the difficult problem-solving aspects of life that you folks solve on a daily basis are a little bit above his ability level. Okay? Okay, Tyler says they've got a family member. Tyler's got a family member with Down syndrome as well. Right. Okay, and I do baseball at the Miracle League. I coach baseball at the Miracle League. It's the only league where the parents haven't cussed me out as a coach, so I love the Miracle League. And we have some Down syndrome kids, and they're usually a ton of fun to play baseball with. Yep. Okay, so let's see, on your own. Now, some applications of IQ tests. Where do we use IQ tests? Well, we use IQ tests to diagnose learning disorders. Now, here's the deal. The research has shown a very strong correlation between IQ score and academic performance. Do you remember that? So the higher correlation, so the higher your IQ score, the higher your academic performance, especially in K-12 education. Not so much in college, but in K-12. So it's going to tell us which kid's going to have trouble in 4th grade, which trouble's going to have 5th grade, which trouble in 6th grade and 7th grade. Now, the way the system is set up, it's set up so that if you are of average intelligence, you should be able to pass through K-12 education. That's just an assumption that is made. However, occasionally there are some children who don't have any visible problem. They don't have a difficult home life. They're not having trouble with food insecurity. They don't have a behavioral problem. And they score really well on an IQ, or normally on an IQ test. But for some reason, Billy can't do mathematical computations. For some reason, Shelley just can't seem to understand the books that she reads. And what we do is, what your school psychologist does is, when you come in with a school-related problem, the first thing they do is give you an IQ test. And if your IQ test shows that you're normal, because we've seen this correlation so long, the assumption is there must be a learning disorder wrong, because this person has the capability to succeed in school. Now, we've talked to their parents. We found out there are no drug problems at home. There are no behavioral problems. There's no food insecurity. After you identify all these other things and see that they're not a problem, if your child scores high on an IQ, or normally on an IQ test, and yet has a limited problem in one area, that's how you get the diagnosis of a learning disorder. If some of you may or may not have been diagnosed with ADHD, if it was diagnosed in elementary school, there may have been a test, an IQ test, or they may have used your third grade COGAT test to say this person's should be doing well, but they don't do well in school, and their teacher reports that they get up and down out of the seat and talk too much, right? We then use that. And I know it doesn't sound very scientific. It isn't. It isn't. It's just a normal IQ test, and some sort of limited dysfunction in school gives you the diagnosis. And so you're going to see this in IQ tests. And read about dysgraphia, dyslexia, and dyscalculia, along with ADHD. These are your most common learning disorders that you're going to see in school. Okay, hold on. Let's see. All right, now. And actually, if you look at chapter 7, they talk about the use of IQ tests in the court system. Forensic psychology is a branch of psychology that uses psychology in the courtroom. Did you know that it is considered unconstitutional to execute somebody if they're insane, or if they score in the IDD range? So the question is, does having low intellectual functioning correlate with lack of moral culpability?
Why can't you execute someone if they're insane?
What now?
Insane, what do you mean by insane?
Well, if the insane or intellectually deficient. So, and you're taking me way out of my comfort area, because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, simply a social psychologist, specifically a community college teacher. But there's some psychosis. If you can prove that you had a history of psychosis, and that this psychosis removes your ability to understand right from wrong, it can be used as a mitigating factor. Did that sound intelligent enough? I hope that sounded all right. And that's going to depend on what part of the country you find yourself in, too. If you find yourself up in the liberal Northeast, that excuse is going to fly. If you find yourself down where I'm from, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, it's going to be harder to convince people about that.
Well, aren't psychopaths also said to not be able to sympathize with people? So
Right. Yes, they have absolutely zero empathy. In fact, there is a video I've got called The Dangerous Few, which suggests that there's something wrong with their emotional system. The kind of things that make you happy and scared don't make them happy and scared, and they don't actually have the ability. However, what they seem to have is a certain level of intellectual organization that we don't like. You know what I mean? It seems like it's more intellectual disorganization. If you're out there and seeing things and you don't seem like you're in control. Psychopaths are pretty much in control. Maybe?
Know what they're doing, it's just they don't have the emotional state.
Right. And should that be a reason? If I really can't feel bad, is that my fault?
It's not your fault, but there are laws, so you gotta go with the law.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right. Benny's seen symptoms of dyspraxia in their state. And she said they do not have a proper kit for diagnosis, and they told they do not even know how to diagnose. Can somebody Google dyspraxia? I have no idea what that is. Wow. And that is interesting. The disorder, we have to understand and be able to measure it. I think the rates of ADD and autism have shot through the roof in the last 30, 40 years. Some people say it's overdiagnosis, but other people say we just didn't know about it beforehand. We had kids who were odd, I remember in 3rd and 4th grade in the 1970s, but we didn't say they had autism. We just picked on them. You know what I mean? That was sort of what you did in the 70s. It was horrible. It was horrible. It was ignorant. Oh, dude, the 70s were wild, man. It was a madhouse there. We played on dangerous things. Our parents would let us walk out of the house all day long. You leave at 9 in the morning, come back. What now? Be back before the street lights came on. Yeah, my mom didn't want to know where I was on Saturday, right? Not anymore. Right. You know, my mom in 1976 used to send me in the convenience store, and I'd go in there with some money, and I'd be like, I'm buying a pack of cigarettes there for my mom, and I would point out to my mom, she'd wave in, and the dude would hand a 7-year-old a pack of cigarettes. They might shoot you now. Okay, so if you remember, I told you science doesn't occur in a vacuum, and we are in that world right now where everybody believes that scientists are godlike, right? And so every time you hear something come out, it's a science, we automatically believe it because we have this sort of hyper-scientific attitude that exists now. So just like now, science never exists in a vacuum. And in the 18th and 19th century, we had some social things that were going on that sort of made the use of an IQ test problematic. So IQ testing was invented at the intersection of several socio-political forces in Europe and America. And I'm not trying to give what they call a woke lecture here. I really think that there is some context which is kind of important. Now, I just finished reading some books about German colonialism in Africa. They had jewels and all kinds of gold and all kind of stuff, cool stuff in southern Africa, Namibia. And so, you know, people had already plundered, the Spanish had always plundered South America in the 16th century, but Africa was still available. And so the German colonialism actually spread to Africa, and basically they went down there, these people didn't have forts or guns or this and that, and they just decided to start stealing from them and calling it trade. It's kind of horrible. But they did this, and in fact, it even morphed into a belief in German colonialism called Lebensraum. Elbow room is what they called it. It was a political philosophy, just like, have you folks ever heard of manifest destiny in the United States? That belief that we should own the whole stinking continent? Well, that existed in Germany as well, and they thought that meant taking over Africa. So here's the deal. We've got these people who are quite intelligent, okay? We're stealing from you, but the way we justify that is by saying, you know what? It's survival of the fittest. This idea of evolution quickly sparked this thing they called social Darwinism. And social Darwinism says that societies evolve just like people do, and societies that evolve quicker and are better able to use the environment can and should destroy other cultures. It's a beautiful theory, kind of wrong-headed, but it does make sense. Our society's better. We've got the guns and the machines. We should destroy you. It's the jungle out here. And that was sort of the belief of social Darwinism. And so that existed. And then right here in the United States, we've got this document that we wrote. I don't know if you've read this, right? Y'all read this? It sounds fabulous. It sounds fabulous until you realize the dude that wrote it had slaves, man. That's kind of hypocritical. And if you think these people weren't smart enough to realize the hypocrisy in this, you are wrong. So what we have to do is, and I don't have this, but this is from chapter 13, we've got this problem where we're saying one thing and doing another. So there was a bunch of research in the 18th, 19th century, you might call it racial research. It was research designed to find differences between different groups of people so that you could scientifically prove that one group was better than the other. One of it was physiognomy, craniometry, so they did measurements of faces, how big's your nose, how far your ears away, how far your eyes away. And then what the Germans especially did this, when they would capture and kill people, they'd send their empty skulls back to Germany for craniometry research. And the idea was you filled their brain cases up with sand or metal pellets and to try and measure the size of brain capacity. And the idea was to say, oh, we're going to show that these people have small brains. We have big brains. This is why our society's better. This is why we're stealing all their gold. This attitude really existed. And in fact, if anybody wants a book citation, I can give you a book filled, it's called Outcasts from Evolution. It is a book filled with all of the most important scientific thinkers here in the United States in the 19th century. Doctors, professors, government officials, ministers of education and whatnot, talking about this kind of research. So we had sort of this racial research going on. So we then get these things called IQ tests. Now, this was not only a belief against minorities, but it was also a way of explaining why some people in society were rich and some people were poor. And that's what social Darwinism about. It was about race, but it was more about money, keeping money and explaining why it was cool for me to have all the money in the world and why it was cool for you or you to be poor. If I could explain that I'm simply better, more evolved than you, then the fact that you are hungry and drug-addled and I have all the money in the world makes perfect sense. And that's what social Darwinism was about. Partially about race, but really all about money, who was better. And a branch of science was born called, it just left me. It's up here. Thank you. Wow, I'm getting old. Eugenics. Boom. Eugenics. The idea then became, we found out that IQ test had a hereditary component. So if your dad and you took an IQ test, it would be more similar than you taking an IQ test with a cousin. Identical twins had a very heritable component. There is a hereditary component to IQ test. And suddenly, the idea was then, because there was heredity within family, that made us then understand that the difference between families, we thought of it as heredity. Look at this. This is a cool idea here. Y'all watch this. Right here. So let's say I have two sets of plants. This is flower bed A, and this is flower bed B. B and A. Now let's say I have some seeds of different genetic strains, right? And so I put flower number 1 here, and it grows up this tall. Flower number 2 grows this tall. And flower number 3 grows this tall. And we might say that these represents genetic differences because they're all in the same pot, right? Now I'm going to take the same strains, strain 1, strain 2, strain 3, and I'm going to put them over here. Except, you know what? I'm not going to give these guys no water, no fertilizer. Now, 1 is still going to be bigger than 2. And 2 is still going to be bigger than 3. That's the genetic difference, right? Now, if I said that overall A was smaller than B, and these got water and fertilizer, if you know that the difference between 1, 2, and 3's size is genetic, What does that tell you about the difference between the plants here and the plants here? Is it genetic? Nurture. It's nurture. But because we've been looking at these correlations that show it's genetic, suddenly when we compare males versus females, it's genetic. Suddenly when we compare African Americans versus Asians, it's genetic. Suddenly when we compare Hispanics versus Europeans, it's genetic. And so what happened with IQ tests? What happened with IQ tests is this idea of something that had a genetic component then began to be used as an explanatory tool everywhere. So this guy named Francis Galton, who was actually a cousin of Charles Darwin, he actually coined the term eugenics and is one of the guys that started eugenics. He actually wrote a book called Hereditary Genius, and here was his proof that IQ was genetic. It turned out that rich, famous, eminent fathers tended to have rich, famous, eminent children, and poor, unfamous, uneducated people tended to have uneducated kids. And that for him was proof that some families were genetically superior to others. Yes, ma'am?
I just agree with the statement. I was listening to a podcast, and then Robin Thicke was on it. And Robin Thicke's father, I don't know if a lot of people know about Robin Thicke's father, but his dad, he basically grew up in, I guess he grew up in the Hollywood industry, so he didn't really have to work for anything. Even if he couldn't sing, he was babysat by Wayne Gretzky. So
Right.
Like, he really had his career and everything already planned out for him. His
Right.
dad wrote The Price is Right, and a lot of other stuff. So
Wow.
I can see, like, you know, if you have the money, your foundation is more solid versus not having the money and your foundation is less solid because less opportunities are granted to you.
Right. And which Hollywood star was this?
Robin Thicke.
Oh, Robin Thicke. Everybody slams on poor Robin Thicke, right?
He had a very interesting life. Like, listening
Right.
to the podcast, he had a very interesting life. His mom was an actress.
Mhm.
So his mom was in Days of Our Lives.
Right.
He had it already.
And then his dad, Alan Thicke, was a star. You said he created The Price is Right?
The theme song.
Wow.
The theme song. And he did the different
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
sang that too.
Wow. All right, that's big money right there. Okay. Right, so in a sense, is it genetic or is it his environment? Well, right now?
It was his environment.
Absolutely. Well, the crazy thing is, this scientist with eugenics, Francis Galton, missed this very basic point. And it's because, in my belief, he already had his mind made up before he did the scientific study. It's because IQ and money, all this is so important. Now, I want you to read about the Calicax on your own. Anybody ever heard of a moron before? Anybody ever heard that term moron? That was a scientific term created by the fellow that did the Calicax study. It was a scientific study of moronism. So read about morons. That'll actually be on your assignment for this week. All right, and as noted on an early slide, IQ tests do show a genetic component among family members. However, once you move outside of family members, you can't really make these genetic comparisons, okay? They don't make as much sense. However, behavioral genetics comparisons among discrete groups do not make sense. However, there are group differences on IQ scores that may lead to misinterpretation about groups, which leads to stereotypes, prejudice, and description and discrimination. Stereotypes are the cognitive component of a negative attitude. Prejudice is the affective component, and discrimination is the behavioral component. I don't know if you remember the attitudes, the first thing I talked about on Monday. You can think of prejudice in a sense as an attitude, the way you think, feel, and act towards people. And in a sense, these differences, we made things. I remember back when I was a kid, oh, you're a girl. girls just aren't as good at math as guys are, right? I remember my wife's family told her that the only thing she could be was a teacher or a nurse, but really it'd be best if she didn't go to college, right? And so these numbers that we measure with IQ tests sometimes lead people to develop these sort of different beliefs and stereotypes about groups. But I do want you to know that there are some interesting and unexplainable patterns with IQ tests. Turns out that you ladies may score a touch higher than us fellows on IQ tests. But did you know what? We have more extreme test scores. So your boys are more likely to be geniuses, and they're also more likely to be intellectually deficient. So you're going to see us more at the extremes than the ladies. And you're going to see there are ethnic differences on IQ scores. Asians score higher than Caucasians, score higher than Hispanic and African American. And there are age differences in IQ scores. That is generational differences. And actually, your IQ does change a little bit as you get older. You know what part you lose? You lose your ability to think flexibly and quickly. You ever been with your parents while they're trying to figure out how to use the remote or do something online? They never move as quickly as you do. Their brains slow down. You still know the facts you know, but your brain just slows down a little bit. Okay, I have a problem with coordination and balance. Oh, I'm sorry. What was that disorder I told you to Google forever ago and then completely forgot?
Dyspraxia.
Yes. She has a problem with balance and coordination. Anybody, is that it? Okay. Thanks for sharing, Benny. I really appreciate that. And that is an accurate definition. Okay. Now, here's one thing I do want to push you towards. All right. Now, IQ tests. Very useful. They've been around about 100 years. They allow us to sort of figure out who should have the most complex job in the military. Or maybe, did you know that there was a gentleman who was not hired by the Connecticut State Police because his IQ score was too high? Too high. Did y'all hear that? They thought that police work, it turns out they say, I don't know, not my words, say it's kind of boring, and people with high IQs get bored with police work rather quickly, and they didn't want to waste their money training this gentleman. He took it all the way to the Supreme Court. Wow. And the Supreme Court said, yes, it is okay not to give somebody a job as a cop because they're too smart. Right?
Because they might get bored though. Like, I don't know, I can kind of see where they're coming from because they might get bored and turn to something else because it's not moving fast enough.
Yep. You can use a criterion as dumb as it is, as long as you would apply it equally.
Because you know, like even like a kid, like if you have a kid that's smarter than, not smarter, but more, you know, easier to understand than the other kids, they're going to get bored doing certain work. And then they start acting out because they have nothing else to do. So that cop might turn to a criminal or find something else to get his wheels going because he doesn't have anything else to do because the paperwork is too easy.
Okay. So Olivia is actually defending the policy. It makes sense, right? And they don't want to spend all that money on the training, right? And as a robber, a bad guy, I'm glad to know the competition is limited, right? Okay, good point.
They start doing other things because they're bored.
Oh, okay. Cool. Right. Maybe illegal things. Okay, you could be right. Kendall, like me, is sitting over here, and he is, wave your hand, Kendall. He is as dumbfounded by this as I am. Who knows? But that's sort of an interesting point. Now, IQ tests, useful and used, but they are limited. They do have these ethnic differences, these gender differences, these things that make us uncomfortable. Some people have used them for evil purposes, eugenics, forced sterilization. Based on having a low IQ score, you could actually be forcibly sterilized. And in fact, the Supreme Court voted on that one too and voted that it was a legitimate thing to forcibly sterilize somebody because 3 generations of imbeciles should be enough. That was actually written in the court's judgment. 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. Right? Now, here's the deal. Some people have done research to sort of expand what we think of as intelligence. As I told you at the beginning of class, when IQ tests were first invented, nobody told Francis Galton, invent a test of intelligence. They didn't say that. They said, invent a test that will help us figure out who's going to do well in school. After the test was created, somebody said, that's an intelligence test. Okay? It was never developed with the theory of what intelligence should be. And so if I told you that being smart was just how well you can do in school, what would you tell me? Anybody online? Is that the only way you can be intelligent? What's another way you can be intelligent? Emotional intelligence. What now? Emotional. Absolutely, absolutely. You can be able to keep your cool and to respond to people in an effective way. How many of you lose your temper too quickly? How many of you have a bad attitude? How many of you can't play well with others? I score pretty high on IQ tests, but my EQ is actually, it could use a little work, okay? Because I do have a bad temper. That's a good one. So your ability to emotionally interact with other people is useful. Absolutely. What else? Street smarts, common sense, absolutely, absolutely.
Back to your example with the mechanic and him being real rich, like he's not good in school, but if you put him, you put him underneath the car, he knows exactly what he's doing.
Good point. All right, yeah. I had a student in class mention the mechanic. You're right. He may not know classic educational stuff. He may not know a dang thing about Shakespeare, but if you put him under a car, he's got you moving in a couple of hours. And if anybody, how many of you can fix a car? Can anybody here fix a car? No, of course we can't, right? So yeah, that is a very valuable ability. Now, if you look at this chart right here, this represents some of the different ways that we've thought about intelligence since the development of IQ tests. Now, if you'll notice, I have a star by fluid and crystallized intelligence. In the 60s, they wanted to find out how IQ changes as you get older. How does people's IQ change as they get older? And what they found is that when you get to my age, the part of your abilities that are changing is your ability to think creatively and quickly, your fluid intelligence. However, I still remember who George Washington is, and I shall always remember who George Washington is. That's crystallized knowledge. Your knowledge for facts doesn't go away as you get older. But Nana and Papa just don't think flexibly. They don't think as fast anymore. And actually, they found that your brain starts doing more communication to work together. Your brain actually makes up for the fact that any part of it's not working as fast. It actually starts to do what's called distributing processing. And we'll talk about that when we get to cognitive psych. So that's fluid and crystallized intelligence. And then you mentioned emotional intelligence. Now that's noted on page 306. They call it temperament. And one of the things that you will notice with children within the first few days of life, some children are fussy babies and some babies are happy babies. This is called temperament, and this quality stays pretty similar your entire life. And you're going to grow up to be that adult that's always fussy and angry and hates it when things change. And then there's going to be the baby that grows up to be the adult that is completely happy with change and can go with the flow. Temperament, that's a form, in a sense, that's the basic building block of what I would call emotional intelligence, along with impulse control and some other things. All right, now, multiple intelligences and the triarchic theories. I want you to read about these on your own. These are just two different theories that say, hey, let's spread intelligence away from just IQ tests. You mentioned common sense right over here. That fits in the triarchic theory of intelligence. There's this thing called practical knowledge, right? If I ask my mechanic friend to tell me about red blood cells, and he looks at me and goes, I don't know anything about red blood cells, he's okay because he's a mechanic, right? On the other hand, if I walk into my nurse and say, hey, what's my red blood cell count? And that nurse goes, what's a red blood cell? That's problematic right there, you know what I'm saying? And so he argues that we should think about knowledge as in what you should know. Anybody ever work with somebody that after 5 years still hadn't figured out how to pick up meals at the restaurant or can't do their job after 5 years? There are people like that, right? And then what I like this guy, Howard Gardner, he actually says that any part of your brain that can control a behavior should be a form of intelligence. So you actually have 2 spots in your brain that are responsible for language. So he says linguistic intelligence is one way. Some people are better talkers than others. There's a motor part of your brain that moves your body. Have you ever seen a dancer or a ballet dancer or a great athlete? You can't tell me that that is not a form of intelligence in a way. Being able to move your body. Anybody ever watch that guy he had the white guy with the afro that would paint the pictures in a half an hour, Bob Ross? Y'all ever watch that fella? Holy cow, in a half an hour he whips up the most beautiful landscape. That's an ability. We shouldn't discount that. That's just like being a great mechanic. That's a form of intelligence. All right? Now, so what I want you to take from this week's lectures, number one, there are different research methods we can use to make links to describe things that we find interesting about human functioning. We can do just basically observational studies like take an IQ test. We can do correlational studies where we try to link variables. And then we can do experiments where we try to set up really controlled demonstrations to show what causes what. But what I want you to understand is as you encounter science in our world right now, remember, context always matters. Everybody's trying to sell something in an article, okay? So context matters. And in order to protect yourself against context, you need to be a good consumer of science. You need to know the strengths and weaknesses of each of these research methodologies. Okay, that is the end of this lecture. If you didn't get credit for being here, please come be counted present. Don't forget, discussion boards are due tomorrow night. And I am having webinars tomorrow night. 7 o'clock for you people sitting in this classroom, 6 o'clock for you folks who are online. With that, I'll go ahead and let you go. Have a great day. Okay. I got you, Isabel. Thank you. Got you. Got you.
Thank you.
What now?
Noah Grismeyer.
Yep. Gotcha. Noah. Got you. Yep.
Hi, I'm Kim.
Kai and Kim.
Yep.
I gotcha. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you.
Just making sure you got me down.
Yep, definitely did.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, no problem, man.
I came in late, Mahika.
Mahika, gotcha. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see. Got you. What now? Ariana, gotcha. Thank you, dear. Ryan Chapin, Maya, Logan, Trevor, Mamie, Cy, William Bazitsky.
Really quickly, I'm sorry, because I'm kind of turning into a pain.
Uh-huh.
I currently have 3 collaboration points, but if I'm not mistaken, I should have 4. So attending the webinar as well as doing the discussion board gives you 3, correct?
Did you, and I'm not looking, did you post one response and reply to 2 other people?
I posted a response and I replied to 2 other people. You gave me a grade for it.
Well, if I, right, Sometimes I only give 1 point if you fail to respond to 2 other people. However,